I'm really about leading at work and living a life. And I really hold true to the fact about that regulation. So I think the first thing you do before you start to tackle your communication is, what is your bandwidth in this season? Are you taking breaks from your work?
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by my Amazon storefront. I've pulled together more than a dozen lists of my favorite gifts, books, and spring cleaning items for educators. My collections on Amazon make it easy to find all of my books written by Easy EdTech Podcast guests, and so much more. Use the link classtechtips.com/Amazon to go straight to my Amazon storefront. That's classtechtips.com/Amazon. This week's episode is titled Digital Communication Best Practices Every Educator Should Know About with Jessica Cabeen. I read an article that Jessica wrote for Edutopia and loved the strategies she shared. Jessica is a principal in Minnesota and has worked with students in kindergarten through high school. In our conversation today, Jessica shares so many strategies you can put into practice right away. And if you listen to lots of episodes of the podcast, you know those are my favorite. So this episode is super actionable, and I can't wait for you to listen. Let's dive in. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica. I'm so excited to chat with you today. But before we jump into all of our conversation, would love for listeners to hear a bit about your role in education. What does your day-to-day look like?
Oh, awesome. And thanks, Monica, for letting me be here. It's just, I've been looking through your stuff, and I just really appreciate what you're doing to reach out and support educators as we still kind of come through post-COVID. I feel like in a way it feels like decades ago, and in a way it feels like just a year or so ago. Mm-hmm. So I think this is just timely communication is important. And so my day-to-day currently, I'm the principal of alternative programming in the Austin Public Schools in Austin, Minnesota. So I like to say the better Austin, but if you have Texas people listening, sorry about that. And I've been an administrator for over 17 years. I was a special education teacher for almost a decade, and then moved into administration. And I've had a really unique path in administration where I started as an assistant principal in a middle school. Then I became a principal of a kindergarten center. So 405-year-olds for 6 years, the happiest place in southeastern Minnesota. It was crazy and incredible, especially because I had a middle school brain as an adult to transition to kindergarten as a leader with a lot of shifts in learning and communication. And then I took the leap to go back to middle school a year before COVID. So I went from like very hands-on to back to middle school, where now all of a sudden we have cell phones and social media. And that wasn't present the last time I was in middle school. So huge jump there. And then 3 years ago, I was asked to create an online high school here for our school district. And then this past year, I've added alternative learning. So I'm the ALC principal too. So the funnest fact I always like to share is my first class of kindergartners are now graduating seniors. So I
Wow.
got to welcome them into the K-12 system, and I get to hand them their diploma as they leave. So it's a real proud moment for me as a principal and leader. And then also I think, I love to write for Edutopia. I've written some books and I do some speaking and coaching just to really help me continue to stay relevant and support other leaders and other educators that are navigating life and learning as it continues to change.
Yeah, and your perspectives. And I love that fun fact. I mean, how special is that for all the families and the students too? I mean, gosh, they probably have pictures from kindergarten graduation, right, with you in it, right? And now that with high school graduation. So just that perspective that you have interacting with students and colleagues and families at all these different grade levels, different types of spaces, as you mentioned, through pandemic or remote teaching too, which, really comes back to our big topic for today. Today we're talking about communication in a digital world. And you alluded to this a bit already with some of those shifts in delivery of teaching, shifts in what devices kids have access to, right, in the environments you support. So how has digital communication evolved in education? What challenges do teachers now face in this area?
A lot. That's a long story. A lot. And I go back to, during COVID, we went from having some boundaries between our school and our home life. And then all of a sudden we were in our home offices, kitchen tables, and responding. Like I can remember initially going a couple days going, when did I last shower? Like when did I last get outside? Like, and then we kind of came back out of COVID, but I don't think we reset boundaries. I don't think as educators, we've given ourselves permission to reset boundaries. And that is not responding to emails at night or on the weekends and because I think self-regulation is key in responding to anyone, children, teachers, adults, community members. If you're not self-regulated, you're not going to bring your best self to any forms of communication. So I think that's a huge thing I see is we haven't given ourselves permission to stop being on all the time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, really huge. And I know one of the things I talk a lot about with slow communication is it's really important to have those intentional approaches to ensure clarity, reduce overwhelm, and just create space for conversations. I regretfully feel terrible at times when somebody might be trying to talk to me and I might be looking at my phone, and I'm not fully present, or that got a minute. I think we've all been in there where a colleague's popped in or a principal's popped into your room on your prep and said, hey, do you got a minute? And we probably don't at that exact moment. Like we're in the middle of something else, and been doing a lot of research around our brain capacity and that myth of multitasking. And if we're not in the right space, our communication is going to suffer for that.
And what you said, is such a great, a reminder, all of these pieces of just, what shifts we've all, been a part of. Some of the shifts in our routines we might not be cognizant of or name or point to or notice. But for educators who were on all the time or felt like they could never turn off, even before they had email communication with everyone in their community, even before, moving to remote teaching. Even the things like you said, like, I want to just respond to this email now, or I've got a minute right now to do this. It takes a lot of discipline, and that self-regulation to say, you know what, if I respond to this email at 9 p.m., everyone's going to think I'm available at 9 p.m., all the time. And I know that sometimes for me, those off hours are the best time to pop into my inbox, but I try to schedule that email for the next morning, so everyone can, feel like we're keeping some sort of normalcy with our hours. So, what are some best practices for clear, effective digital communication among educators?
Absolutely. And I want to share a little story too, because I think sometimes our intention and impact can be impacted by communication. So just another reason or another hall pass for you to start to really think about setting those boundaries was when I became the kindergarten principal, I think it was 2014, 2015, I was sending emails on Friday nights, or I would come in Saturday mornings because my boys were still sleeping in at that point. They were young. So I'd come in and work. And then finally the green gopher teacher, Josh, sat me down and just said, hey, you send emails at like 8 at night on Friday or 6 a.m. on Saturday. And then we feel like we have to read them. And that was such a, oh my goodness. I felt awful because that was not my intention. And it really made me rethink. And so I think this has been since 2016. Any campus I work on, they know that I'm not going to send emails after 4 at night or on the weekend. And like you said, we schedule those out so they know they're coming then. But then if they need me, they text me or they call me. And they can email me individually. And I do check email like once at night and I'll respond back. But I've really set those boundaries, not just for me, but then for them. So educators have permission. Okay, I don't need to check email at night because my boss isn't going to be emailing me, or I don't need to check email before work because I know she's not going to email me before, so I think we've had to set some protocols in place for that. And then I think when we talk about as educators, some talking points like clarity, reducing overwhelm, and creating space, consistency. So we do we call it a Friday focus, but it comes out Thursday night. So staff know every Thursday, that's the quote unquote staff newsletter that's got things that are coming up next week, things that are coming up next month. Another way we try to reduce overwhelm is we calendar everything. So you don't have to think about when are grades due at the end of third quarter or when is graduation, or even spirit weeks. What do I have to wear on each day? They're little things, but they have big impact because it doesn't require adults to have the brain capacity to try to look it up or remember it, things like that. And then even with parents, if you're communicating with parents, a lot of it is digital and parents may work during the day. So at night is the time for them to communicate with you. If you're new to setting these boundaries, having an out of office that reports back or letting parents know, here's when I am able to respond to emails. And so it gives them that we're receiving it, but it doesn't need, we have to respond immediately if that kind of helps too.
And all of that is really just about setting up everyone for success. You know what to expect. You're taking some of the unknown, which causes stress, right, out of these structures and routines. And I love that story that you shared because I think for many of us, right, we're like, I don't mind answering this email now, or it's not a problem for me to do this on a Saturday. I'd rather get back to them so they know that, right, this is ready for them. But that's also putting stress on the reader of this email, right? Or whoever we're responding to think that they need to respond right back, even if that's not, our intention, right? In catching up with our own to-do list. So I love that reminder and just those moments to acknowledge, I got this, I received your email, but here's when you can expect, to come back to me. And, how can teachers ensure, that those messages that they're sending, whether it's emails or newsletters or maybe a digital update communication tool that they're using, are actually read and understood by whoever their recipient might be, families, colleagues, students, you name it.
I think, it's similar to how we look at grades. We do formative and summative assessments with our student learning. I think we can also do that with our communication. So some districts utilize SMORE or certain platforms for email communication, looking to see how many people are actually opening it, clicking it, and opening it. I think also, are you using social media? Are you using other pieces? I've seen some, back in the day in the kindergarten center, teachers had private Facebook groups for their families because that was the primary mode at that time was Facebook. Some other people used email or texting. I think too, just being really clear too, and maybe following up with families. Here's the thing too with educators is so often we try to fix something and we may go back and forth. It's almost like that email boomerang between a parent that really someone else should come in and help support. There's been many times where I've come into an email exchange between a teacher and a parent and I'm like, whoa, I don't want these parents talking to educators the way the parents are. And it's we're going to take a time out here and it's actually going to take that off. So I think sometimes seeing what type of communication's coming in and then thinking about, is this something I can respond to back in an email? Is this something better to say, let's make a phone call or a conference? Or do you need to loop somebody else in at this point? This seems really heated and contentious. Don't ever be afraid I always say, phone a friend before you hit send. Phone a friend, have somebody. I have multiple people look at my email responses to make sure that they're very clear and kind and understood before I hit send, because I could unintentionally escalate something too.
And that's a great point too, with just making sure that people are really receiving the message you might send to them, right? That clarity, making sure something's not confusing, and the tone, right? If, we're sitting next to them, it's very different than if they're reading a message and maybe they're holding on to a lot of big feelings about a tense situation and, something doesn't come across just right. That can happen unintentionally, but we can also be proactive, right? About trying to remove some of those moments. So, you mentioned having another eye, right, on email before hitting send. What are some other effective ways for educators to seek some feedback from a colleague, when they're interacting in these digital environments?
I think if something doesn't land correctly, having a colleague, a trusted colleague, or ask them, what could I have done differently? Or a lot of times too, if something's landing, like if you're receiving something that's working, ask that person, hey, how did you figure this out? How did you communicate? How are you able to communicate this clearly? And I think just like educators, parents need to hear it more than once and more than one way. So if there's a big event coming up, it could be an email, it could be a flyer in the backpack, it could be a text blast, and maybe leading up to it, maybe you're talking about this event 3 months in advance, 2 months in advance. Like, I think there's also a way of being clear, but also over communicating. So thinking exactly what you want to say and continuing to say it. So it's more of a feedback loop than just a one and done kind of thing too. Because I think as educators, a number of us are also parents. And so I always hate it when I'm the principal and my son goes to my school and then the teacher's like, check that email. And I'm like, epic fail on my part. The parent hat is like, no, I didn't. And so I think being an end user too is helpful. So if you are an educator and also a parent, like think about when teachers have communicated with you, what teachers have communicated, how has it been received for you, what has worked, what hasn't, and then try to replicate that too.
Yeah. And even just finding those examples that act as inspiration or that, came across really clearly, how they worded something, right, can make such a big difference. And, what you said too about just the repetitiveness or the consistency of reminding someone, even just, calling the same event the same name, right? Is this family literacy night? Are we calling this the pizza party with books all the time? Like, are we naming the same thing, right? Or referring to it inconsistently? Because that's super confusing for someone who's like, wait, what night is this and what night is that? What do you mean they're the same thing, right? If we're talking about different things that are going on. So, there's lots of different tools and resources out there that help support communication. And some schools and districts might have something that they have adopted they're being asked to use. Others might be looking for something, right, that is going to help support some of their communication goals. Are there specific digital tools or platforms you'd recommend for gathering and organizing feedback from colleagues or supporting, right, communication in your spaces?
So I can just give examples from our system. So our student information system in our district is Infinite Campus. And so we really try to make it a one-stop shop for families. And so like if we do a s'mores newsletter, it gets embedded in a portal push through Infinite. So parents, it's like they can just open up their parent portal and see, here's all the newsletters, here's all the updates. We try to really make it just a one-stop shop for them. So the more you can align your systems, especially K-12, because it does get really hard if you're in our elementary schools, we use this. In our middle school, we use this. In our high school, we use this. So really thinking about it more systematically, or even within your building, like, are we all using Facebook groups, or are we so parents as they go from year to year can kind of have some continuity with that communication, I think is really important. And then on the adult side, one thing that we actually just did Monday, we had a professional development day, and the staff know at the end of the day, I send out a Microsoft form or a Google form, whatever works. A, it counts as their CEUs for the day then, so they don't have to sign a piece of paper. But B, I always like the questions I always ask is, what did you like today? What did you learn? How would you impact tomorrow? You're teaching tomorrow. And then I always end with ask Cabeen anything, because sometimes I forget things. And so then it's an open forum for teachers to say, hey, do we have computer returns figured out for the end of the year? Or, hey, have we talked about this? Or because there are things that we might miss and that our colleagues could help kind of fill in the gaps. Or it helps me think about like, oh my goodness, I have not shared the computer return plan yet. I better get that out. So I think offering ways for open feedback that's asynchronous to really meet the needs of a lot of our adults, because some of our adults are more extroverted and are the ones that can raise their hand in the staff meeting and just say what they want or need to. And some teachers that like terrifies them. And so I love that Microsoft form or that Google form opportunity because it's consistent, but it also allows for different learning and communication styles to interact in a level platform.
Yeah. And that consistency with both of those groups, I think is really key. Like, this is how it always works. This is where I go to submit something. This is where I go to receive the communication from schools, and what you mentioned about the system deployment, right? Of one big tool for a whole district, even for a school that might say like, oh, we really loved this feature, or we really want a tool that has this one thing and the one we're all using doesn't have it. I think there really is that payoff to say, if I switch up to a different tool, is that going to impact who even opens this up in the first place? Right. Mm-hmm. So like there's trade-offs in all directions. And I would much rather, not have one great feature in this other tool and still have a 90% open rate, right, of family emails, as opposed to just having this nice feature that I would love to make use of. But now, 20% less of people know where to go because they have students. They only have one kid in my building and they always default to the one from last year, right? So I think that's such a great reminder for people, right? That consistency that you talked about. So for someone who's listening today who wants to improve their digital communication skills, is there just one thing, like one small piece of advice that could help them move the needle maybe this week, as they're listening to this episode?
Absolutely. I think, and we kind of started at the beginning of this, and if anybody, you Google me, you look me up, I'm really about leading at work and living a life. And I really hold true to the fact about that regulation. So I think the first thing you do before you start to tackle your communication is, what is your bandwidth in this season? Are you taking breaks from your work? Because trust me, like there are times when I get an email at 8 p.m. and I'm like, if I respond right now, I'll get it done, but it won't be the right communication. It might not be the right tone. I might be frustrated. So, setting those boundaries around when you're going to respond to things, how you're going to take breaks from your work life so you can live a life outside of that is going to be essential. So I even talk about creating that ideal week of when you're communicating, when you're taking time away. And then secondly, I think just that slowing down, it doesn't always have to be immediate. And I think as an educator, there are days when you're teaching and let's say you're covering a friend's classroom, you might not even get a chance to go to the bathroom. And so you open up that inbox and you see 150 emails and you're like, oh my goodness, it's overwhelming. It's exhausting. So I think just really figuring out how to slow down, how to say the same thing over and over again, setting repetition and systems, but ultimately really just that communication. It's not only about when you say it, but what you say is really going to matter. So having that, taking those breaks to have that tone and the intention be really clear.
Well, Jessica, this has just been so helpful, so actionable for listeners who are tackling these challenges. Where can people connect with you? I'm going to link out to all the things, of course, but for someone who's on the move, where can they go to learn about your work?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and Facebook and X at Jessica Cabeen. And then I do have a website, jessicacabeen.com. And then I do a monthly newsletter that just is, again, actionable tools, recent articles I've read that really, again, lean into that foundational lead at work and live a life perspective, because I just really want to gift that back to educators. We have the best and the most important role in the world. And I want to make sure that people also are treated as that royalty. Like, you deserve as much as we can give back to you because you give so much to everyone else.
Well, we will make sure to link out to all the things so everyone can find you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It was lots of fun chatting with Jessica today. So let's make this EdTech easy with some key points from the episode. Set boundaries for when and how you communicate. Schedule emails to respect others' time. Use consistent tools and routines to reduce overwhelm. Clarity and repetition help messages stick. Remember, you can find the show notes and full list of resources from today's episode, including all of the ways to connect with Jessica Cabeen, by heading to easyedtechpodcast.com and finding today's episode number 319.
This episode is sponsored by my Amazon storefront. I've pulled together more than a dozen lists of my favorite gifts, books, and spring cleaning items for educators. My collections on Amazon make it easy to find all of my books written by Easy EdTech podcast guests, and so much more. Use the link classtechtips.com/Amazon to go straight to my Amazon storefront. That's classtechtips.com/Amazon. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.